Okay, welcome everybody to the second week of Master Your Mind. We're gonna talk about how to deal with difficult emotions. Just as an FYI, I won't give out my slides, but you're welcome to take pictures during the presentation or after if you need to. Happy to do that. Can I get a volunteer that's got a nice loud voice if we've got something to read? Okay. Let's go ahead and start with this to set the stage. Okay, is he afraid of the bird or is he afraid of the feelings he associates with the bird? What do you think? The feelings of the bird. Because I assume that if he was off without a bird and he thought about the bird, he'd actually get a little anxious about it. So I want that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to talk about. When we go in this kind of phobia state, we have this association, and our brain kind of conceptually separates into the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational brain, and then it goes into in a phobia situation like this, it goes into the primal brain or the limbic state, where the brain is designed to protect us physically and emotionally. And the brain is always on the lookout for danger. So it's going to make associations. That's how it learns. So it attaches a negative feeling to whatever caused that negative feeling. And it decides that it's scared of that. It's got to avoid it. It's very similar to Pavlov's dog. This classical conditioning is going on. So the comedian Nate Bargatze is going to describe the two parts of the brain. Don't take me too seriously here. So fear is designed to be life-saving, but as you all know, it feels terrible. So how do we normally respond to those feelings? Yeah, we run away. Um, get away as far as possible. So will you read that nice and loud?
Act on a perceived threat by avoiding people, things, and experiences. You teach your brain that these are real dangers, not just perceptions. Fear strengthens with repeated avoidance.
Okay, so whether that be a cockroach or a bird, it's the same as afraid of a math class or a math test or homework or asking somebody out on a date or having a difficult conversation. So whatever the difficult emotion is, anxiety could be one. We typically try to avoid it somehow. That provides short-term relief, but that actually has just instilled greater fear in our limbic system, which causes long-term growth going forward. So Sheldon had a irrational fear of birds because of being a kid, having some kind of exposure to birds. And then every time he was exposed to them, he avoided it somehow. So it just got bigger and bigger. So how do we typically escape these kind of emotions? We're talking about anxiety here, but I want to broaden the discussion of typical fear to emotions in general. How do you escape boredom, conflict, overwhelm, awkward conversations, intimacy, closeness, loneliness? This is what I want you to think through the whole lecture is, what are you afraid of? What kind of emotions are you afraid of, and how do you avoid or minimize them? So I think the reason that Gen Z is seeing such a huge spike in mental health issues is not new frightening situations, but new technological advances for how we can escape and avoid. So historically, they had alcohol. That's how they got away from terrible feelings. Battle fatigue, emotional problems with their spouse, like it was alcohol, maybe cigarettes. But then, coming in with the advent of the smartphone, all of a sudden now you've got a plethora of opportunities to avoid difficult emotions. So we've got Netflix, we've got social media, food is a way to avoid emotions, video games. And none of these are like bad in of themselves, but when used to avoid things that you should be dealing with, that's when they become problematic. If I said retail, what's it called? Retail what? Therapy, pornography, substances, schoolwork. You can become a workaholic. You can actually excel in school, but at the expense of things that you actually should be dealing with head on. Worrying is kind of ironically a way of avoiding actually dealing with the situation. Let me play a video from Dr. Tyler Jarvis. He's in the math department, talks about his graduate experience at Princeton. I never asking for advice or help until I exhausted every other means to solve any problem. The result was, he never criticized me, but I never listened. I spent 3 years in his classes and only focusing for a total of about 45 minutes. And one of the students had no fear at all. He would go to the professor almost every day to ask questions. He was criticized regularly, but he never seemed to care. I thought he was completely crazy. But he was back almost every day.
and learning a lot. It took me several years after graduation to realize I had wasted an opportunity of a lifetime. But the student wasn't so crazy after all. He got many hours of personal tutoring from one of the world's greatest mathematical minds, and I got to graduate school safely without being criticized.
Read this.
Social anxiety isn't just fear of judgment, it's fear the judges are right. We think there's something wrong with us, and we avoid in order to conceal it.
So that's the core of social anxiety is avoiding these difficult emotions. Lying as a way to avoid difficult emotions. Perfectionism.
Perfectionism is driving. Shame is always riding shotgun. And fear is the annoying backseat driver. But again, when perfectionism is driving, shame is always riding shotgun. We struggle with perfectionism in areas where we feel most vulnerable to shame. Does that make sense? So we're all comfortable saying, yeah, I'm a little perfectionistic, which is because I do things really well. But I'm not comfortable saying I have shame. Perfectionism, what is that? I call it the 20-ton shield. Here's what perfectionism really is. It's a way of thinking that says this: if I look perfect, live perfect, work perfect, I can avoid or minimize criticism, blame, and ridicule. Whoa, that's good. All perfectionism is the 20-ton shield that we carry around, hoping that it'll keep us from being hurt. When in truth, what it does is it keeps us from being seen. And so we have.
So on average, BYU students have a 3.9 coming in. Why did you get such good grades? Was it to avoid criticism, to kind of validate yourself? What were you avoiding in doing that? I'm not saying everybody was, but I think several fall into that category. The style of people pleasing is another way to avoid difficult emotions because we're fear of not being liked. See if any of those land with you. I'm a recovering people pleaser. Michael Scott might be a people pleaser.
Do I need to be liked? Absolutely not. I like to be liked. Enjoy being liked. I have to be liked. It's not like this compulsive need to be liked, like my need to be praised.
So have you ever had a feeling that you didn't like about yourself, that you got offended, you were criticized, rejected, and then you didn't validate your own feelings? You were like, you kind of minimize. It's no big deal. I actually just did this 2 days ago. I felt rejected from my wife, and I didn't validate my own feelings, and I was trying to get over it and trying to just avoid and minimize those. This is kind of, I don't like using therapy terms too much, but this is kind of like self-gaslighting, where you're not even validating your own feelings. So procrastination is essentially not about the thing you're avoiding, it's the emotion that you're avoiding that you imagine in your head when you do that thing. So you've got that big project, you've got that test, and you're anticipating the uncomfortable emotion around doing that project, studying, taking the test. So that's what you're actually avoiding. It's not the thing itself. It's not the bird. It's the feeling around it. So it's how you handle procrastination. And we all have seen productive procrastination. That's how you clean your apartments, right? Because you're avoiding some tests. So I'm not saying it's all bad, but will you read this?
42 people were given the option of sitting quietly for 15 minutes with no distractions or giving themselves an electric shock. More than 2/3 of the men and 1/4 of the women chose to shock themselves instead of being left to their thoughts. These were people who told researchers beforehand that they would be willing to pay to avoid the shocks.
What does that say?
People choose suffering now over having to deal with things that they're thinking about and feeling.
Yeah, they didn't want to sit with their own emotions. I mean, this is, I had some kid, I was teaching this about a year ago. And he raised up his computer and he's like, I'm playing a game right now during your lecture because I can't stand the idea of being bored. So he was paying attention and playing a game so he could be maximally stimulated. So every time we avoid and escape a difficult emotion, we're building a neuron connection and we're building the pattern in our brain. And myelin forms around this, which is a fatty substance, to make the neuron connection go even faster. So these become very habitual. And it's after a while, it's hard to break.
You're not a procrastinator. You have a habit of procrastinating. Big difference. Because if it's a habit, I can teach you the science to break it. You see, all habits have three parts. There's a trigger, and in the case of procrastination, the trigger is always stress. Then there's a pattern you repeat, and in the case of procrastination, it is to avoid doing something. And then there's a reward. You get a little stress relief. The only way to break a habit, you guys, is not to deal with the triggers. You're never gonna get rid of the stress in your life. But you can 100% change your pattern of avoiding work. So next time that you're in a situation where you feel yourself hesitate, you spent way too much time checking out the highlights from last night's scores, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go, oh, I must be stressed out about something. Acknowledge the stress. Then go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I want you to count yourself because I want you to interrupt the habit that's stored here, and I want you to awaken your prefrontal cortex. Then I want you to just work, just for 5 minutes. The reason why I want you to only work for 5 minutes is because your problem isn't working. It's the habit of avoiding. I just need you to start. And here's the other cool thing. We know based on research that if we can get you to start, 80% of you are going to keep going.
What were you guys thinking about things you avoid and ways you avoid it? I want you to think about it. We're going to talk about some in a few minutes, but I want to introduce this concept from the great psychologist Carl Jung, who says what you resist persists, which is kind of an ironic thing. We think we can get rid of it by escaping it and running away from it, but it's actually ironic. And so if you're trying to avoid a difficult emotion, you actually exacerbate the emotion. I'd like you to close your eyes for a second. Okay, I don't want you to think of a pink elephant. Okay, raise your hand if you can think of anything else with a pink elephant. Okay, stop thinking of the pink elephant. Stop thinking. Okay, open your eyes. This is kind of like when an inappropriate thought comes to your mind and you try to suppress it, get rid of it, and you're so consumed with getting rid of the inappropriate thought because you don't think you're supposed to be having this, that it actually makes it worse and kind of compounds and becomes more of a problem. This is the idea with ruminating thoughts, obsessive compulsive, is you're so afraid of certain thoughts and what you're doing that you try to get rid of it.
The emotion that we don't want to feel is the emotion that we invite in the exact way that we try to avoid it. So the perfect example of this in my life was I, had this experience of being emotionally abandoned as a kid. And so I would just keep on finding emotional abandonment everywhere I looked, It was like, the guy who's like, close their eyes in the bar, throw a dart behind their back, and they're always gonna hit the wounded woman, and like they're gonna be attracted to one another, and that's how it's gonna work. Like it was, I always, created this abandonment. And so when I thought it was coming, when I saw the abandonment, even though maybe it wasn't there, I would harden up. I would get angry or something, which of course creates more likelihood of abandonment. So I would try to not feel it, and in the way of not feeling it, or I would really try to caretake somebody, and that would create resentment in them, and then they would abandon me. So every way that I tried to avoid it, I was recreating it in my life.
So here's some scenarios of almost self-fulfilling prophecies. Somebody's like, I don't want to be alone, so they end up acting needy and clingy to make sure somebody doesn't leave them. But that very behavior ends up pushing those people away. And now they realize I'm alone. Or I don't trust people. They always let me down. I subconsciously keep people at arm's length. See, I'm all alone. I don't want conflict, so I'll avoid having difficult conversations. And my resentment has increased, and now it's worse. So Sigmund Freud, I don't agree with too much of what he says, but this is a really good one. The unexpressed emotions will never die. They're buried alive, and they will come forth later in uglier ways. Have you guys ever tried to hold a beach ball under the swimming pool? What happens to it? It totally comes shooting up, right? It's kind of like unprocessed emotions. Very similar response. So let me ask you the question. If we create fears by avoiding, how do we get rid of the fears? We lean into them. We do the exact opposite that created the problem. Get curious with them. Emotions are messengers. They're telling you something. They're not always correct or true, but they are telling you something. So thank them for telling you and trying to protect you, and but you don't necessarily have to listen to them. But if you try to get rid of them, they end up becoming more of a problem. So get curious with them. Be comfortable sitting with them and accept the emotions.
The most natural response in the way but when you do, it's tightens and it becomes a sweeter state. Something I talk to people about in therapy is that dealing with the feelings is much the same. Don't feel anxious, you escape and then avoid the things that make you feel anxious so that you can feel safe. Or when you're overwhelmed with sadness, you might stay busy or eat or drink to look at. When you do that, the emotion that you're trying to escape, how can you express in your life? Because then you have to make your decisions based on the things you don't really feel. Something people learn in therapy is that when we turn towards those feelings and we're willing to be in that space, then the trap widens and you get this wiggle room. Then you get to choose when to be with that feeling and when to step away from it without having to fight your way through.
So you can retrain your brain by doing what you're afraid of. You can teach it that there's nothing to be afraid of. So do what scares you until it doesn't. So symptoms of fear or intense anxiety won't last typically for more than 45 minutes. So if you just realize that's kind of your body doing its thing, let it ride. And then every time you confront it, you're kind of regulating your nervous system to whatever you're trying to deal with and process. So anybody ever seen the movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey? It's a great way of facing your fears. So this is typically what this is called, what your brain is comfortable doing. Who thinks they kind of are trapped by their comfort zone? It's a very real thing. It's a very real thing. This is just kind of a conceptual way. I try to conceive it in a different way, a little more specific, because it's not equal all around. So you might be super good at one-on-ones, but totally afraid of dating or large groups. You may love math and get yourself out of your comfort zone with that, but maybe you don't love trying new intramural sports. I mean, we kind of all have different varying degrees, but when you face one of your fears and kind of lean into a difficult motion in one area, it tends to expand your entire comfort zone. And the same thing, if you kind of escape the fear of one, you end up training your brain to be afraid in general. And you're literally shrinking your world, what your options are. Your relationships will dwindle, you'll have missed opportunities academically, career-wise, relationship-wise. So be constantly aware of whether your world is expanding or contracting. Anybody tried to selectively suppress certain emotions? I think we all do. We're like, well, let's enjoy the good ones, but I don't want to think about my mother's death or that breakup. And we're like, try to suppress one emotion. We read that?
We cannot selectively numb emotions. When we numb the painful emotions, we also numb the positive emotions.
So this is typically what happens with childhood trauma, or trauma in general, is you PTSD, et cetera, is you try to put that out of your life, try to suppress it, but then you can't say, I want this one emotion, but not these others. It turns them all off. I want to give you an example of somebody who's feeling all their emotions. This is a good example of how we should all be. I love that. So second Nephi is a second Nephi 2, opposition in all things. That works on a neurochemical way and an emotional way. You have to have the good to have the bad. So there's actually a BYU alumni who was he did a very famous TED talk. I think it's at 20 million views by now, and then he wrote a book. And he engaged on 100 days of rejection therapy.
Day one. $400 from stranger. So this is where I went to where I was working. I came downstairs and saw this big guy sitting behind the desk, and he looked like a security guard. So I just approached him, and I was just walking, and that was the longest walk in my life. I carried the back of my neck standing up. I was sweating, my heart was pounding, and I got there and said, "Hey, sir, can I borrow $100 from you?" And he looked up and was like, "No." Why? And I said, "No, I'm sorry." Then I turned around and just ran. I felt so embarrassed. But because I filmed myself, so that night I was watching myself getting rejected. I just saw how scared I was. I looked like this kid in Sixth Sense. I saw dead people. He wasn't that menacing. He was probably a lovable guy, and he even asked me why. In fact, he invited me to explain myself. I could have said many things. I could have explained, I could have negotiated. I didn't do any of that. All I did was run. I felt, wow, this is like a microcosm of my life. Every time I feel the slightest rejection, I would just run as fast as I could. And you know what? The next day, no matter what happens, I'm not gonna run. I'll stay engaged. Day two, request a burger refill. Went to a burger joint at Phoenix Lunch, and I went to the cashier and said, "Hey, can I get a burger refill?" And he was all confused, like, "What's a burger refill?" I said, "Well, it's just like a drink refill, but what's burger?" And he said, "Sorry, we can do burger refill, man." So this is where rejection happened. I couldn't run, but I stayed. I said, "Well, I love your burger, I love your joint, and if you guys do burger refill, I love you guys more." And he said, "Well, okay, I'll call my manager about it. And maybe we'll do it, but sorry, we can't do this today." Then I left. And by the way, I don't think they ever done burger refill. But the lack of that speed I was speaking the first time, no longer there. It's because I stayed engaged, because I didn't run. I said, "Wow, great, I'm already learning things."
So he's learning to regulate his nervous system. He was sick and tired of the responses he was having, always running away. So he decided to train himself. He's done really well. And I'm suggesting this solution for you guys. So, let me go list 100 days. You can read some of the ones who did. So I've done this at periods of time in my life. When I was a first year graduate student here in my PhD program, I hated to cook, so I would go eat at the Moore Center, which is like it was the Deseret Tower version of the Cannon Center. So I would find somebody who was eating alone, and I would go sit down and ask if I could eat lunch with them. I thought this would help me overcome my approach fear, and it would theoretically provide some kind of companionship or friendship to whoever. Now I like to eat alone, so I'm like, they were probably bugged, but it was still good for my nervous system to train. Like, I'm going to meet somebody new today, every day, and I did this for quite a few months. So let me go back to this. Who's willing to say some kind of situation that they tend to avoid, and I want you to share, if you're willing to, how you tend to avoid it. Who wants to volunteer? Please, in the back.
The paper, avoided by watching a show.
Okay. I think you may be the only one in the room that does that. Anybody else? Please, nice and loud.
As a kid, my grandparents on my dad's side were super affectionate, and we were an affectionate family. So when they would come to visit twice a year, I would hide for about an hour, like when they were in the house, so that by the time I came downstairs, they'd already like hugged and kissed everyone else. And they wouldn't harass me.
Very interesting. I hope that doesn't play out in your marriage. Okay, who's next? Please.
I think we touched on it. It's kind of like being alone with my thoughts. If I'll just start scrolling or doing YouTube, so I don't have to and that would make me stay up at night because, well, you have to have nothing to kind of be quiet to be able to go to sleep. So
Yeah. How many people love sitting in line and just sitting there? Or what's the default option? Pull out your phone, right? Anybody else? Please.
I have this weird avoidance. When I get behind, I avoid catching back up by doing whatever, like reading is the most common one, but anything that's not doing the schoolwork that I am behind on.
Interesting. Thank you. Anybody else want to share? Please.
Hanging out with other people, and I do that by taking too many credit hours.
I love the honesty. There was a kid he had 4 majors and he took 21 credits every semester, graduated with a 4.0 and probably had never had a date in his life. Please.
But failing like a test or an assignment and then kind of like, oh, that doesn't matter too much.
Minimizing it. Great. Thank you. Please.
Worried about like getting bad grades, so I would never check my grades.
Oh, fascinating. Oh, I love that. Well, I don't love that, but that's it. Somebody else? This is group therapy. I love it. Please.
To bed early. I don't know why. I know it's time for bed, I like stay up for some reason.
Interesting. There was
I avoid boredom, so I just fill up my schedule with as many things as possible.
So that's it. I mean, that's maybe a healthy coping mechanism, right? It's better than just like gaming all day. I mean, there's more productive ones than others, but I really want you to search deep because you'll be amazed. I'm 51 and I'm still discovering emotions I'm trying to avoid and the lengths I'll go to avoid them. So let me ask you this question. How does leaning into something uncomfortable actually change the nature of the very thing? What do you think?
Look away.
I love it. So there's no inherent danger with either one of those, right? But so it's kind of, well, maybe the needles. Well, I actually used to have a fear of needles, but then I kind of reframed it as, oh, I'm at the doctor and I'm getting better. I'm here to get healthier. So I kind of totally reinterpreted what it meant to embrace the needle. Oh yeah. So they love you. So this is my daughter. She came home last year from taking the ACT. She's like, Mom, Dad, I did so well. That was actually really fun taking the ACT. And I was like, I've got a mentally ill child. What's going on? Actually, I've got 3 of them. But she was like, somebody taught me that excitement and fear are the same thing in the body. It's just how you interpret it. And I was like, yeah, I did. I taught you.
Years ago, I was watching the Olympics, and I noticed that all of the reporters always ask all of the athletes the same question, which is, are you nervous or were you nervous? And all of the athletes answered the question the exact same way. No, I'm excited. No, I was excited. And I realized that the characteristics of nervousness are clammy hands, your heart starts pounding, you start envisioning the future. The characteristics of excitement are clammy hands, your heart starts pounding, you start envisioning the future. But the reason the journalists were asking, are you nervous, is because they would be nervous. Whereas these elite athletes had learned, the mindset and learned to interpret that anxiety as excitement. And so all of the athletes gave the same answer, and all of the journalists asked the same question because the journalists aren't elite athletes.
So by the way I'm presenting and the fact that I'm voluntarily putting on this lecture series, would anybody guess that I used to be mortified of public speaking? Probably not. Now that I've explained it, you're like, okay, this is something he took on, but I refused to give my mission farewell because I was so afraid of speaking in public. So it can be done. Anything can be done that you're afraid of. And I just want to think, I just want you to think, what are you avoiding? So about 18 years ago, I woke up, my wife was breastfeeding our second at like 2 a.m. I woke up and for some reason, half of my body went numb, like this entire left half. So I go to the doctor, they're like, oh, it must have been a heart attack. They run the tests. No, it's not a heart attack. You probably just had a panic attack. And so that led to a fear of having a panic attack. If you've never had one, you feel like you're dying, literally. You think you're going to die. So there's such a fear of having another one that it actually precipitates the very act of having another panic attack. So panic attacks are complex, and I'm just sharing my experience, and I'm doing it briefly. But when I realized that the panic attacks were happening because I was afraid of it, as soon as I realized this was merely a biochemical response going on in my body, I would just kind of watch it happen, accept that it was happening, and the body was going to do its thing. And like I said, it won't last for more than 40, 45 minutes. And as soon as I realized that, I stopped having the panic attacks. And so that was a lesson I learned 18 years ago, and now I'm trying to apply in all areas of my life.
When you stop resisting. Yeah, resistance is the issue, isn't it? And in my book, I kind of asked the question, is there any suffering other than resistance? That's such a profound question. Does suffering exist beyond a feeling of I don't want to suffer? Wow, that's a question, isn't it? And how much are we conditioned, especially in modern life, to constantly seek comfort and constantly push away any tiny bit of discomfort? And so how much is that just making us into resistance machines, which means there'll always be suffering? It's almost like the resistance creates something to resist or be resisted. So we're almost building suffering through our resistance. Yeah. So what if we take away the resistance? And of course, meditation is about that, because you just rest into or move into the feeling without pushing it away, without judging it, without telling yourself stories about it. It's just you in the feeling. The resistance goes, and then where is the suffering? Suffering is resistance.
So let me give you some examples, and I want you to yell out what's a good way of leaning into each of these difficult emotions. Let's go through these quick. So boredom, what's a good way to lean into that?
Exercise.
Exercise. That could be an escape, but like maybe learn something new, exercise, do something, be okay with being bored, because that's when you tend to get creative. What about conflict? Fear of conflict. Engage in that difficult conversation. What about overwhelm? Just get started. Just start small. What about fear of rejection? You just got to lean into it. Fear of success? A lot of you guys don't understand that, but like that means put yourself out there. Raise your self-worth. The fear of being alone. Just sit with it. Be okay with it. What about guilt? How do you lean into guilt in our religion? Talk to God or go talk to your bishop. Repent. If you've got anger, find out why. Get curious about it. What is this telling me? Depression, sometimes it makes us want to do things. It makes us want to be alone. It makes us want to stay in bed. So to lean into that is to actually do the opposite. Shame, you can be vulnerable and share. Awkward, just own it. I saw this video of a little kid who was going up on a stage to get an award, and he tripped on the stairs, and he just started doing 20 push-ups right there on the stage. He owned the trip, which everybody would be like mortified. Cravings, urges, this is like feeling horny, this is feeling hungry. You might give into it and avoid the feeling by looking at pornography or eating that delicious meal, but maybe you channel it in a better energy. So sometimes with, anxiety wants you to run away, wants you to avoid. Depression wants you to stay alone. So sometimes you got to do the exact opposite. There's a term called opposite signal strategy in the social sciences, where you deliberately act contrary to one's initial impulses or instincts. And here's an example from Seinfeld of how this is done. Guys, the ladies love it. You can't fight it. So if something seems too big, you can create a fear hierarchy. So if you want to ease into it and kind of do exposure therapy, you can kind of rate. So if your goal was to teach a class of 300 people, like that might start small and you work up into bigger and scarier things. So you can kind of acclimate your nervous system, or you just jump right in. It's kind of up to you. But fear not is mentioned how many times in the Bible? A lot, 150 times. And the opposite of fear is faith, where you're stepping into the dark. So here's the summary today. Lean in and reframe it as a good thing. And let me close with this.
Slowly and carefully, dropping down the toilet. Just like we did with the mailman. Then people around the world are killed by birds.
That can be you. Thanks for coming. We'll see you guys next week.
Now it.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for reading. If you guys want to provide me some feedback, I would love to hear it. You can scan this QR code. These are some of the lectures we'll be doing in the next couple weeks.
You should ask yourself.
Oh, thanks.
Tell you.
I appreciate that.
I have a test.
Somebody left their AirPods with a pink case up. We got it up front.
Yeah. The first thing, it shouldn't be too long. I'm gonna go study with someone right now. So we did. My trainer. Yeah, that's one.
We're in my place. We're doing the same thing.
After you take 50 words, then sure, when can you pick it up? I love bumping words, but I love
Oh, that's a good
Mustache looks good with this suit.
Let's go.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I can't reach.
Probably did. I just wanted to so busy.
Pacific. It's not like general. We have a specific feature. And
Yeah, I forgot that.
Is the rumors being already? Colin, as my kids would say. Yes, you're great. Yeah, of course. Of course. They want this done. Why?
not bad.
You want the
Good job. Do you know your professor?
do way more exciting things in life. This is what pays the bills, so. The Raptors are not gonna pay. Exactly. Bye, I'll see ya.
Not if I wanna do that. Like stick around. If you want to do research.
Disability.
Seven.
You just ran into Spencer last night.
Stay here and just munch. About not coming out of that. Really? Yeah.
Even say that, but like. If there's actually. I don't know if we're gonna be on Fox.
Gone? It looked like a money. Yeah.
Actually, just watched it like 2 years. Okay. That's what you should watch a lecture series.
That's awesome. I like this a lot. The bucket list.
Ordered watching it.
Jesse.
I started watching it, but I never.
Doing really well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You did bought it.
Actually.
You need another one.
Oh, I don't.